Hello, welcome to So Simple with me, Holly Roberts. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a cute button-closed pillowcase. To do this, you will need, of course, a pillow, usually about a yard of fabric depending on what size your pillow is, and the usual needle, thread, pins, marking chalk or a marking pencil, an allowance ruler, measuring tape, a needle threader in case you need it, snippers or scissors. In this case, we're going to be using both, paper and pen, an iron, and of course you're going to need some kind of cute button to close your pillowcase. Alright, so to start off with, we're going to take our pillow and we're going to measure it. So we get our tape measure, and this is a square pillow, so they're probably all the same. Just remember, whatever you're measuring, measure it very loosely, so that way the pillowcase doesn't fit too tightly. Alright, so we have 15 inches that way, and just making sure, 15 inches the other way. So we're writing this down because we're going to have to do a little math here to figure out how large our pillowcase needs to be. So we know one side is 15 by 15, but the way we're going to be sewing this together, we need it to be double the length. So we're going to need a 15 by 30 inch piece of fabric. Now we also need to make the part that's going to fold over. So we're going to take half of that and add that to the length. So it's going to be a 15 by 37.5 inch piece of fabric that we're going to need. Alright, so we had to move over to the big table to measure out this fabric. So we're using a large piece of recycled fabric, and we're just going to measure out our pillow length, our full length, and allow a 1/2 seam allowance. So what I'll actually be marking out is going to be 15.5 inches by 38 inches. To do that, you just line up your tape measure as best you can with the edge of the fabric, smooth it down. Now we're at the 38 mark, and just make a slight mark with your chalk. I'll tape it across. We're about 15.5 inches, so choose your starting point. Mark the starting point. Smooth the tape down. And mark where it hits 15.5. And from there, you can either use a pattern making ruler, or, like I'm going to do, just use a regular ruler. Going to complete those marks. You want it to be as straight as possible. Usually lining it up with the end of the fabric, or if you have a cutting table, you can use the grooves in that. Right here, I'm just using the edge of the table to make sure my lines are straight. And once you're done with that, take a sharp pair of fabric scissors, and we're just going to cut this out. not done yet. We still need to measure out the seam allowances and mark off other areas. So we're going to start from the bottom, and we're going to mark off the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just make a little mark. And then we're going to do that along every side, marking off a 1/2 inch all the way around. Our next step is going to be starting from your seam allowance. You're going to measure from the bottom, smoothing out the tape to 15 inches. Now this is going to be where the fold happens. We're not going to do any sewing here, but we do need to know where the pillowcase is going to fold underneath the pillow. From there, we measure another 15 inches. This is going to be the fold over the top where it will button in. Now the last mark we're going to make and cut is going to be at the top. So we have a full 7 inches here. We're going to go in the middle, just at 3.5. We're going to put a 1 inch, starting at the 3, going to the 4, buttonhole. We're going to measure from the middle just to make sure it's centered. And we have 15.5. So we're going to put it at about 7, probably 8 would be smart. What's half of that? It'd be 7 1/4. That's where we're going to put it. Apologies. And now that we have a basic setup for where the buttonhole is going to go, we're just going to cut a small line. And that's easy to do by pinching the fabric and snipping. And there we have the buttonhole, and I will show you how to stay stitch that later on. Okay, so now that we have our piece, we just need to mark off, this is the bottom. So we'll just put a little B there. Middle. This is the top. And then this is a fold, just so we don't get mixed up. So we're going to start with something we all know how to do if you've watched previous videos, with the pinning and sewing of a hem at the bottom here. So we get our pins, and following the guidelines we set earlier, just going to pin this hem in place. So now the bottom part is pinned, so we know exactly where we need to stitch. And just for time's sake, we're going to go ahead and do the same to the top part. Now this is the little fold. It's going to come over where it's going to button close. It's going to be very adorable. In order to do this one, at the fold line, we've marked off along the seam, and we're just gonna snip that little piece closed, or snip it open, rather. We're gonna do that on both sides. So that way it separates, just like that. For this part, we're gonna fold over and hem this side, then this side, and then finally this side. So that way you have that little lip there. And as always, just follow the markings. Alright, so it's kind of hard to see because the thread matches the fabric, but this is all stitched up. It's a very secure stitch. A little bit of a hem lift, that's okay. Next step is going to be taking our iron, and we're just going to smooth out that hem. Just make sure it lays flat and even. And of course, we're going to do it with the other side, which has also been stitched closed. And as you can see, it should look like that, which is that little overhang there on both sides. There we go, perfectly flat, perfectly even. So of course, turn off the iron and we set it aside to cool. Now at this stage, we're actually going to turn the fabric over so that the side we've marked is on the bottom. We're going to fold up so that way we can see the hem here. We're going to fold up so that these top corners meet each other. Make sure that it does that on both sides. Straighten it out a little bit. Make sure it lays flat. And if you've done this correctly, the mark is very faint, should show right there to show where the middle is. So everything's lined up, and we're ready to start pinning. So now that the fabric's on the wrong side, we're going to pin from here down closed on both sides, and then we're going to sew it up. now both sides are pinned, creating this small, almost like a bag where it's folded over the bottom, but open right here. Our next step is going to be to sew these edges closed. Now on this one, we're going to actually follow the marks we made earlier instead of folding it like we would a hem. We're just going to follow those white marks all the way down. But remember, we're going to do it with matching thread. And when we come back, we'll be able to see that it is securely closed. Alright, so now both sides have been stitched up, which of course is really hard to tell. And now we're just going to clean that up by trimming up the edges. Like we have some of this excess fabric here. Of course, we always want it to be neat and presentable, even on the inside. Alright, so our next step, since we have this sort of bag, is going to be to turn it inside out. Make sure the corners poke out. And what we're left with, just a cute little bag like this. And you'll have this excess that folds over. Alright, our next step will be the button. So you can see right here, we already made a small hole. I'll mark it so that way maybe you can see it a little better. And what we're going to do is split that hole open and mark underneath. And this will tell us exactly where our button needs to go. So now that everything is marked off, we're going to sew closed our buttonhole. Now the method we're going to use today will be called stay stitching. And it's simply doing a back stitch around the hole. In just a moment, I will demonstrate that for you. So of course, preparing our thread. Just do one more little knot for good measure. So basically, we're just going to be doing a back stitch around this hole, and what stay stitching will do is it will create this almost distressed look. So if we were just to leave this buttonhole the way it is now, just a simple cut in the fabric, it would eventually tear. And it would fray, and it just wouldn't look very good, and it wouldn't hold up. But by stay stitching around it, it allows the hole to fray, but it'll stop at the stitching. And it creates this very unique look that actually looks pretty cool. And that to get a better grip. this is, of course, a very good look if you're doing a shirt. I like to do it around the collar because I think it gives it a little bit of personality. Now we're just going to tie this together, close off the stitch. And then we cut off the excess thread. And now it looks a little weird for now, but over time it's going to get this very, very neat distressed look to it, and it'll just be very unique. Now for our last step, we're of course going to put the button on. For this project, I chose a little bell button because it was the biggest one I had, and it's just so cute. So again, getting matching thread. We're just going to sew her on. As you can see, the back has the little loop. So stitching her on will be very, very easy. You don't need a lot of thread because it is just a button. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our needle and we're going to come up through the inside into the little mark we've made. We're going to pull the thread all the way through. They're at our little area here. And we're just going to thread the needle through the little plastic hole in the back. Pull that through, and then we're going to re-enter the fabric in the same place we came out. And we're just going to repeat that several times until we feel that the button is secure. Like you've got her securely on. Shorten that a bit. And you just tie it off in the back the way you would any other stitch. And as always, we trim off the excess, and there you have it. So now your pillowcase is completed. We're going to test it out by sliding the pillow in. Very carefully, of course. Don't want to tear any of your stitching. Done it bit of a tight fit, but not so tight that you feel the stitches are going to pop. You want it to be very snug against the pillow. And as a last step, just going to fold over the top, slide our little button through. Always remember you can do any kind of shape you want for that overlap, and use any kind of button you want as well.
Ah, yes. Ah, awesome. Thanks, Holly. This is great.